Good day, Strand. In today's video lesson, we will going to talk about the one sample mean using traditional method of hypothesis testing, wherein the sigma or the population standard deviation is known. In this lesson, we will only be talking about one sample z-test or t-test. So, a one sample test is a test, of course, that is conducted on one sample, syempre, from a population with mean mu. And one sample z-test or t-test is sometimes called a significance test for a single mean. So, there are two cases to consider for testing the mean of a single population. First thing to consider is that it should be normally distributed. Thus, we can apply the Central Limit Theorem and we use the normal curve as a model. And second one, of course, we will use z-test if the population standard deviation or sigma is known. But if sigma is unknown and S is known, therefore we will use t-test. Of course, sigma there symbolizes population standard deviation, and you already know that when population standard deviation is presented in the problem, we will use z-test, while if the sample standard deviation is presented, we will use t-test. So, in traditional method of hypothesis testing, wherein sigma is known or the population standard deviation is known, we have condition here that if the test statistic, of course, z-test, when the sigma is known, we only use z-test, but this also applies with when the sigma is unknown, wherein we use t-test. So either of the test statistic, z-test or t-test, when we compute for the z computed value and the t computed value, when they fall under the rejection region, therefore, the null hypothesis or the decision is that the null hypothesis is rejected. But if the computed test statistic or the computed z or t value falls under the acceptance region or what we know as the non-rejection region, therefore, the null hypothesis is not rejected. So, in such cases, we can say that the hypothesis has been rejected at the alpha level of significance if the population standard deviation, which is also known as the sigma, is known. Then z-test is used. So, there are 6 steps in traditional method of hypothesis testing. In this video lesson, we will be only focusing on z-test because I will only be giving you examples wherein the population standard deviation, sigma, is known. So the first step is we formulate the null and alternative hypothesis. So to formulate the null and alternative hypothesis, we should find the claim and make the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis in words and in symbol. I believe that you already know how to formulate null and alternative hypothesis in words and in symbol because we already tackled it when we are in week 1 lesson. For step 2 naman, we determine the type of test. What are the two types of tests? So we have one-tailed and two-tailed. And one-tailed, of course, is classified into two. We have the left-tailed and right-tailed. We also identify the significance level or alpha, which is already given in the problem, and also the critical values. So the critical values we write depends on the type of test we will be using. And the type of test we will be using depends on the standard deviation. So in this case, we will only be using z critical value because I will only be giving you sigma or the population standard deviation. So I've already presented to you table wherein z critical values are presented when it is two-tailed test and the alpha is 0.05 or 0.01, where when it is left-tailed test, binigay ko na rin yung z-critical value. Kapag left-tailed and right-tailed siya, it depends, no? It depends on the type of test and the level of significance. It depends on the two sa yung makukuha nyo or yung ibibigay nyo na critical value. So, of course, if it is a left-tailed, should be negative, and if it is right-tailed, positive, and kapag two-tailed naman, positive, negative. So, for our step 3, we compute test statistic. So, test statistic was already discussed with you. We have formula there, right? So, you just, what will you do is, you just identify the given and substitute it to the formula. And then that is step number 3. For step number 4, we state the decision rule. So I've already presented also the decision rule. There are certain conditions, right, as to when you will reject or will not reject the null hypothesis. First, so in step 4, you will only rewrite the decision rule. No? It depends kung ano yung decision rule na pipiliin nyo or isusulat nyo. It depends on the type of test. Kasi tatlong decision rule yon. So, for t-test and z-test, pareho lang yung decision rule, but magkakaiba yung decision rule niya based on the type of test. We have the two-tailed, the left-tailed, and the right-tailed. For step 5 naman, we make the decision na. So, there are certain conditions, as I've said a while ago, and if that satisfies the condition, it is automatically, the null hypothesis is automatically be rejected. But if it satisfies the condition, therefore, we will not reject the null hypothesis. And for step 6, of course, is we write the conclusion. So, if we're going to reject the null, of course, we will write the alternative hypothesis as our conclusion. And if the null hypothesis is not rejected, therefore the null hypothesis is accepted. Therefore, we will write our conclusion as the words in null hypothesis. Let me give you an example now to make it clear. So applying the 6 steps in traditional method of hypothesis testing, let's answer number 1. So let me read it to you. A drug manufacturer claims that the average weight loss of women using their drug is 4.55 kilograms per month with a population standard deviation of 0.91 kilograms, and 10 women chosen at random have reported losing an average of 4.05 kilograms within a month. So does this data support the claim of the manufacturer at 0.05 level of significance? So to follow the 6 steps in traditional method of hypothesis testing, the first step there is we will formulate the null and alternative hypothesis in words and in symbol. Of course, before we formulate, let us first identify the claim. It says here that a drug manufacturer claims that the average weight loss of women using their drug is 4.55 kilograms per month. So, umpisahan natin yung claim natin. Tandaan nyo, laging nag-uumpisa sa the average. Yan. So, kokopyahin lang natin. Since, so let me ask you, is our claim under null and alternative or alternative? So, if your answer is null, you are correct. So, kung sagot niya naman is null, dahil nakita nyo lang dito yung claim, so, correct din naman, no? Kahit nakita nyo. Anyway, so bakit kaya yung claim natin under null hypothesis. So, remember week 1 lesson? Remember the symbols, no? Sabi dito, the average weight loss of women using their drug is 4.55 kilograms. So, kapag nakita yung is na word, that symbolizes equal sign, right? And we have equal sign symbol under null hypothesis. So that's why our claim is under null hypothesis. But if our symbol is their drug is not 4.55 kilogram, therefore our claim is under alternative. But since wala naman siyang word na not, that's why it's under null hypothesis. So, tandaan nyo, basta may equal sign yan, under null hypothesis siya. So, yung mga symbol naman for alternative, we have greater than, less than, and not equal. So, ayun nga, just write the null hypothesis in words. The average weight loss of women using their drug is 4.55 kilogram per month. So, in symbol, that is mu equals the hypothesized value, which is 4.55 kilograms. So, that is our claim. And for our alternative hypothesis, of course, we will only be writing the opposite of alternative, null. So, imbes na is 4.55, gagawin natin siyang the average weight loss of women using the drug or their drug is not equal to 4.55 kilograms per month. Then that in symbol, that is mu is not equal to 4.55 kilograms. Ma'am, pwede po bang may kg dito? Of course, yes, no? That's the unit of measurement. So, and also, ma'am, pwede po bang the average weight loss of women using the drug is not 4.55 kilogram per month? Yes, pwede din yun. For as long as parallel siya sa word, no? Parallel yung mga words natin, yung mga keywords natin, tatanggapin ko naman yun. Hindi naman ako maselan. So, next. For our step 2, we just identify the type of test, the alpha or the significance level, and the Z critical value. Bakit Z critical value kaya ilalagay natin, hindi T critical value? Because the given is population standard deviation, and population standard deviation has symbol of sigma. And when sigma is known, therefore, we will use z-test. And when we will find z-test, of course, we will use the Z critical value. So, the type of test is what? So, since dun sa step 1 natin, syempre yung type of test depends on the alternative hypothesis. Since our alternative hypothesis is mu is not equal to 4.55, therefore our type of test is two-tailed. So remember, no, kapag not equal siya, two-tailed. Kapag greater than, right-tailed. Kapag less than, left-tailed. And for our alpha or the significance level, syempre reflected naman dito sa problem, that is 0.05, which is also equivalent to 5%. Pero in decimal lagi tayo. And for our Z critical value, since it is two-tailed and it is, the alpha is 0.05, so 0.05, and two-tailed is positive negative, therefore our Z critical value is positive negative 1.96. So, ito yung Z critical value natin. But, you must follow, no? Please write it this way. Yung positive negative niya, no? Dito hindi ko lang siya magaya sa nasa ano natin, nasa table. Pero ito talaga yun. Ito talaga yung right way ng pagsusulat ng positive negative 1.96. So for our step 3, yung gagawin lang natin sa step 3 is we find the given. So our population mean or mu is 4.55. Usually yun din yung sa ano natin sa step 1, yung sa kapag nagpo-formulate tayo ng null and alternative. Yun yung mu natin, population mean. No? And our sample mean naman is, so malalaman natin yung mu natin kapag tapos ng claim na average, yung word na average. So the average weight loss is 4.55. That is our mu. For our sample mean naman, dun siya, yun yung sample or yun yung mean. Kasi kung titignan mo dito, pares silang mean, pinagkaiba lang, population yung isa, sample yung isa. So sa population, pagkatapos ng word or na binabanggit siya dun sa madalas, binabanggit siya sa claim. No? Ito yung claim natin, therefore this is the population mean. Yung sample mean naman, madalas binabanggit siya pagkatapos banggitin yung sample size. So this is our sample size, therefore nakita na natin yung word na average, therefore our sample mean is 4.05 kilograms. And our population standard deviation, nakasulat naman dito, this is 0.91. Therefore, sigma is 0.91. For our sample size, ilan ba yung women na pinag-conductan ng study? We have 10 women. So, N is equal to 10. So, upon substitution, alam ko, ginawa nyo na to sa assignment nyo, your answer should be negative 1.74. So for our step 3, step 3 is just the decision rule, no? We will only be rewriting this decision rule since our type of test is two-tailed. Therefore, we will rewrite the decision rule for two-tailed. So the decision rule is if z or the z computed value is less than or equal to the negative z critical value, therefore, or we have two decision rule pala in two-tailed, or z is greater than or equal to the positive z critical value if that condition satisfies, no? Then we will reject the null hypothesis. Otherwise, we will not reject the null. So, ma'am, isa-satisfy pa both to? Hindi po. It depends on the z computed value. If your z computed value is negative, of course, we will only be using this one. While if your z computed value is positive, we will only be using this one. In this case, in example number 1, it is negative 1.74. Therefore, we will be using this one. So for our decision rule, let us compare the z critical value to the z computed value. Since our z computed value is negative 1.74 and the z critical value is positive negative 1.96, and therefore we will compute negative 1.74 to negative 1.96. Thus, we can say that negative 1.74 is greater than, right? Negative 1.74 is greater than negative 1.96. And negative 1.74 is less than 1.96 kasi yung dito natin, the z critical value, the condition is this, no? The z computed value should be less than. But in our case, the z computed value is greater than and not less than. So if our answer is, eto kasi yun, no? Yung z computed value natin, yung na-compute natin, sa substitute lang natin sa condition. So kapag sinubstitute natin siya sa condition wherein z computed value is less than or equal to negative z computed critical value, eto yon kapag sinubstitute natin. No? Negative 1.74, that is our z critical value, is less than or equal to, dapat may equal to. Or naman siya, no? So, it doesn't matter if it is equal or less than, or naman siya. Basta kahit anong mag-satisfy, pwede siya. So, if negative 1.74 is less than or equal to 1.96, is the statement true or false? So, the statement is definitely false because 1.74 is greater than or has much value than negative 1.96. Please correct this one. This is negative. Negative 1.96, no? So, mas malaki po yung value ng 1.74 kesa sa negative 1.96. Kaya, since our condition is false, therefore, we will not reject the null. Remember, we will only reject the null hypothesis if our answer, when we compare it, our answer is true or yes, we will reject the null. If our answer is false or no, we will not, or we do not reject the null. Since our answer is false, we will not reject the null. So for our conclusion, since the null is not rejected, therefore it is accepted. That is why for our conclusion, thus, the average weight loss per month of women using the drug is 4.55 kilograms. As you can see, for our conclusion, we only rewrite the null hypothesis since it is not rejected. So, if you're still, if you have questions, no, feel free to comment down below para masagot natin yan. I will no longer be changing account muna na because it's already time. But please comment down below if you have question kasi magte-test po kayo bukas. So to make the discussion clearer, let's discuss example number 2. So the school nurse thinks that the average height of 7th grader has increased. So the height of a 7th grader 5 years ago was 145 centimeters with a standard deviation of 20 centimeters. So she takes a random sample of 200 students and finds the average height of her sample is 147 centimeters. Are 7th grader now taller than they were before? Conduct a single-tailed hypothesis test using alpha 0.05 significance level to evaluate the null and alternative hypothesis. So, the first question here is, ano ba yung iniisip or kiniklaim ng school nurse? So, we can say that his or her claim is that the average height of 7th graders has increased. No? Kapag sinabing increased, is it, what is its symbol kapag increase? Isn't it, it's greater than, and we all know that greater than is under alternative hypothesis. So that's why our claim is alternative hypothesis. So for our alternative hypothesis, we can say that the average height of 7th graders or 7th grader is higher than 145 centimeter. So because 145 centimeter is our hypothesized value. So in symbol, that is mu is greater than 145. And for our null hypothesis, syempre yung kabaliktaran ng higher than, but huwag yung kakalimutan yung or equal to na word dahil nga kapag pinag-usapan natin is null hypothesis, we get the opposite of alternative pero may kasama siyang equal sign. So the average height of 7th grader is, so kabaliktaran ng higher than, lower than or equal to 145 centimeters. So therefore, null mu is less than, since lower than siya, less than or equal to 145. So that's it. That's step 1. So for our step 2, we identify the type of test, alpha and z critical value. For our type of test, of course, it is right-tailed. Why? Because the alternative hypothesis is greater than. Kapag greater than yung symbol, of course, it is right-tailed. And dito naman yung alpha is 0.05, so 0.05. And why z critical value? Ito nga yung tanong, no? Ma'am, sabi niyo po, ginagamit lang yung z-test kapag population standard deviation siya. Ginagamit yung t kapag sample standard deviation. Pero dito po, standard deviation lang. Wala naman nakasulat na population standard deviation siya. So aside from analyzing the problem, no? So, tinitingnan nyo lang dyan yung kung saan nakapwesto yung standard deviation. So, if nakapwesto siya after ng population mean or hypothesized value, therefore, it is population standard deviation. If naman nakapwesto siya pagkatapos ng sample size or the sample mean, kapag dito siya banda sa likod ng 147 cm, dito siya nakasulat yung standard deviation of 20 cm, therefore, it is sample standard deviation, and therefore, we will use the t-critical values and t-test since, no, nakasulat siya dito before ng hypothesized value or the population mean, therefore, it is a population standard deviation. So, yun lang naman yung shortcut doon. So, for our z-critical value, of course, it is right-tailed, and right-tailed is positive, so 0.05. Therefore, our z-critical value is 1.65. Ma'am, paano naman po kapag t-critical value siya? So, kung naalala nyo yung recitation natin, yung naghahanap kayo ng t-value sa t-table, those are the t-critical values. So, let us identify again the given, no? For our population mean or mu, it is 145 kasi yun yung average pagkatapos ng claim, no? This is our claim since, therefore, our average or population mean is 145 and usually nakita yun sa step 1. For sample mean naman, after nung sample size and, ayun, sample size. Ito yung sample size natin, 200 students, and the average height daw of her sample is 147. Therefore, sample mean is 147. For our population standard deviation naman, or our standard deviation is 20, therefore sigma is 20. And syempre, yung sample size natin is 200 students. So, upon substituting this, no, this given into the formula, your answer should be, your answer in your assignment should be 1 positive 1.41. So, for our step 3, just copy or rewrite the decision rule. So, our decision rule when it is right-tailed test is that if the z computed value, yung 1.41 na na-compute natin, should be greater than or equal to the z critical value. If that's so, therefore, we will reject the null. Otherwise, we will not reject the null. So, for our decision making, let's compare, no, the z critical or the z computed value to the z critical value. So, yung unang tanong dyan, is the z computed value greater than the z critical value? So, is 1.41 greater than 1.65? The answer is no, or okay, no. Thus, since 1.41 is less than, no, not greater than, less than 1.65, therefore, our decision is that we do not reject the null hypothesis. And therefore, for our conclusion, since HO or the null was not rejected, we will assume that it is true kasi nga hindi siya na-reject. Thus, the claim of the school nurse is false. Mali pala yung claim ng school nurse. Ano ba yung conclusion dapat natin? That since HO is accepted or we do not reject the null, i-rewrite lang natin to as the conclusion. So, since the claim of the school nurse is false, therefore, the average height of the 7th graders or grader is lower than or equal to 1.45 centimeter. So, ayun. Those are the 2 examples, no, that you can use, and please copy it in your notebook, no, so that alam nyo kung paano gawin nyo or madali nyong mamememorize yung mga steps. So, recap lang tayo. We use the traditional method of hypothesis testing if and only if we have two cases. First one is normally distributed dapat siya, thus we can use the Central Limit Theorem. Second one is if sigma or the population standard deviation is given, therefore we will use z-test. If the sample standard deviation naman yung given, we will use the t-test. So if z-test yung ginamit, therefore z-critical value yung gagamitin. If t-test yung gagamitin, therefore we will use the t-critical value. So we have 6 steps, right? First one is we formulate the null and alternative in words and in symbol. Second one, we identify the type of test, the alpha, and the z-critical value. That's step 2. And for our step 3, of course, is we write the decision rule. For step 4 naman, we will compare. After comparing, you decide na, no, if you will reject or you will not reject the null hypothesis. Remember, no, that the decision making always depends on the null hypothesis, while the type of test always depends on the alternative hypothesis. And of course, lastly, for our conclusion, if you will not, or yung decision nyo is do not reject null, therefore, the conclusion, just rewrite the null hypothesis in words in the conclusion. If you will reject the null naman, syempre rejected siya, yung isusulat nyo naman sa conclusion is the alternative hypothesis. So that's the end of my discussion. I hope pinapanood to ngayon, no? If pinanood nyo to ngayon, for sure, bukas makukuha nyo din yung exam nyo. So, sobrang dali lang ng exam. Okay? So, that's it. Have a good day. God bless and stay safe.